Hey there, welcome to the second installment of the In Session podcast brought to you by Air Gigs. I'm David Blacker, I'll be your host. In this podcast, we sit down with top session musicians, recording engineers, artists, songwriters, the people behind the music, the people who were there at key moments when great recordings, great moments, great energy was being captured. And today we were really psyched to sit down with Ike Willis, one of the core members of the Frank Zappa band, touring and studio bands from 1978 to 1988. Ike was both guitarist and vocalist for the band, and is most recognized for his involvement on Zappa records such as playing Joe in Joe's Garage, providing vocals on Tinsel Town Rebellion, You Are What You Is, and The Man from Utopia, as well as being the title character and narrator in Zappa's off-Broadway-styled conceptual musical Thingfish. Also, Ike is now playing in 12 Zappa tribute bands, so he's a busy man doing a lot of touring right now. He regularly also does studio voice work and writes his own compositions for films and leads the Ike Willis Band, under which he's released 2 solo albums and is currently working on a third. So today, in today's conversation, we covered a lot of topics, and it was really fun to sit down with Ike. In all honesty, I came to Zappa very late. My musical background is much more in the roots music, and I found my way back from sort of the British rockers back to early blues and jazz and rock and roll. And so I came, in researching this project, I started getting into Zappa, and I was like, wow, I don't even know how to, this is a whole universe in and of itself. It was really eye-opening to sit down with Ike, who had such close contact with Frank, who was an integral part of his creative team. We talked about a lot of cool stuff. We talked about how he initially got the gig. We talked about some of the working dynamics of being part of the band. We also talked about important stuff such as what he took away from the experience, things that Zappa embodied, like having this incredible confidence to put anything out there. And kind of he attributed that also to the idea of young songwriters, having that kind of confidence to stand behind their work, often when, warts and all, as he said, So this was a really informative and fun interview. Be sure to check out Ike's gigs on Air Gigs, because Ike is now offering remote vocal and guitar sessions, which is an incredible opportunity for anyone to work with a guy who was, has a ton of experience. And you can't throw anything at Ike that in his experience with Zappa, that you just have a guy who's a wealth of experience and talent, ready to work on your songs, which is an incredible thing. Lastly, we do these interviews from the road sometimes. From our part, they're usually recorded phone conversations, and we're catching session musicians, and artists between traveling and all this stuff. So the sound quality can be a little dodgy at times, so we ask your forgiveness on that. But without further ado, this was really fun. I think you're going to dig it. Let's dive right in. So Ike, we're really pleased to be here with you today. There's a lot of ground I'd love to cover. We can start, but I know we want to keep it brief because you got a pretty rigorous touring schedule coming up, so we'll just kind of cut right to it. And the overview is I'd love to get into just a little bit about pre-Zappa, what you were doing, what were some of the earliest influences and experiences, and through the Zappa phase, kind of what you really took out of that, and then we'll wind down into where you're going now and what's inspiring you these days. So first off, thanks very much for taking the time.
No problem, man. Not a problem.
Why don't you just lead us into what were some of your formative musical influences, experiences? What kind of got the bug, or what gave you the bug for music?
Honestly, what gave me the bug, how I got started, was when I was 8 years old, going on 9. I saw the Beatles make their first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. It was historical. It was groundbreaking. It was sorcery, man. It was magic, because that was the first time you saw a band playing their own music that they wrote, and they're playing the instruments, and and they're doing all the singing, and that was, for me, that was what I'd always dreamed of. What bands should be. That's what bands should be like. You know what I'm saying? That's what. And plus the instrumentation, 2 guitars, bass, and drums. Right? That was it. That did it for me. And as soon as I saw that, and as soon as I saw the harmonies and Lennon and McCartney, and dude, it was the combination of everything. And that very second, I begged my parents to buy me a guitar because I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to do that. You see here. Let me give you a little background. My mom was a jazz singer. She was born in Chicago, and she used to tour while she was even pregnant with me. And she grew up with Lou Rawls and Miles Davis and people like that back in the Midwest. And that's how I grew up. You know what I'm saying? And that whole scene and that whole existence for me, I thought it was fantastic. I thought everybody should do this, And like I said, the minute I saw John Lennon, I was hooked. I was totally hooked. And I thought that was the greatest thing on earth.
Sorry. I was just going to say that show, I've heard from so many different people, that one appearance kind of lit the fire of so many musicians. That one, it's just such a powerful moment.
Well, you bet. I mean, like I said, it was history making. It was all those things because of just a simple instrumentation. Like I said, 2 guitars, bass, and drums, and they're doing all their vocals and all that stuff. I thought, well, this makes so much sense. It makes total sense, and that's the way bands are supposed to be, and that's what they're supposed to sound like. And I was never into the old, producer groups. In other words, somebody else wrote your tunes, and they produced it and they made all. And I was never into that. That didn't make much sense to me. And when I saw the Beatles, it was like, yeah, that's what bands are supposed to sound like. And they're they're doing harmonies and all that stuff. And when I found out that they wrote their own stuff and it was their music, needless to say, like I said, I was hooked. I was totally hooked.
That's awesome. Did you know you were kind of searching at that point, or was it just a lightning bolt kind of thing?
It was kind of the lightning bolt thing, and I was, my mom was a jazz singer, and I grew up in a house full of music, so hey, no problem there. But I hadn't planned to be a musician or anything like that. In fact, it was the farthest thing from my mind. But
right.
When I was searching for something, but what do I know? I was only 8 years old.
You were 8 at the time. Okay, so then how soon after that did you start, getting, and what were some of your early musical experiences? Did you get right into it, start writing songs, or how did it evolve into actually doing it?
The very second I saw the Beatles, the next day I grabbed my friends and whoever had instruments and started putting together a band. I wasn't going to be satisfied until I could do that myself. I figured, man, I've got to do that. And then remember, this was the British invasion, so you had the Beatles, the Stones, various pacemakers, and it was also let's see, Motown. And of course rock and roll transformed into an actual art form. You know what I mean? It got respect, and I thought it was fantastic. I was ready, because I was ready for, well, even though I wasn't looking specifically for anything, I wanted to do something with my life. But the main thing is that, come on, this stuff was great. The music was fantastic. The music was fantastic. The the songs were well written. You know, it had art to it. It had class to it. And I was, you know, I was just stupefied every time the Beatles released a song. Every song that they did on Ed Sullivan, you know, it's like, oh my God, this is like real music. You know, suddenly rock and roll got respect. You know, it demanded respect, and like I said, it turned into an art form. So I was like, man, this is too good to miss. And, you know, I'm not going to be satisfied until I'm able to do what these guys are. You know, I used to write my own little songs and stuff like that, but there was no, you know how it is when you're a kid. There's no format for any of that, right? There's no format. There's no stage. There's no place that you can actually make it into something. And I was kind of frustrated too, because, you know, all my life I sang. You know, my mom sang, everybody in my family sang, and of course there's church and all that. But it never had any respect. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you want to play music? That's not a real occupation. You know, why don't you get a real job? And that was the thing. It was kind of funny. It was kind of funny. And the next year, as soon as I got into the Beatles, the very next year when I was 9 and I was about to turn 10, and my best friend that lived across the courtyard from me, he came running across the courtyard, waving this album at me, going, dude, you got to listen to this. And it was a Freak Out by Frank Zappa. Frank's stuff was totally, I mean, the Beatles was sorcery. It was witchcraft, but Freak Out, you know, Frank Zappa, that was totally on another planet. You know, it was totally on another planet. And you know, what are you going to do with that? You know, that was real composing. That was real. That was like on a different planet, totally on a different planet.
Totally. And so then you started playing in your own bands, and then I'm kind of curious, like, at the point where you connect with Frank and, you know, Zappa, the Zappa band, like, what were your musical aspirations at that point? Like, had you at that point kind of realized what you were trying to realize, but then this amazing opportunity opened up and you were like, you know, I can't, like, my question is kind of like, was that the next exact evolution of what you were trying to do, or was it like just sort of like another light, like I can't pass this opportunity up, this is the most,
well,
does that make sense?
Well, I wasn't looking at it like, well, this is going to be an occupation. All I cared about was the music. I wanted to be able to create that kind of music that made a difference, that made people sing along to it and remember the words and you know, and listen to it on the radio and stuff. I mean, the thing is this. Okay, remember when they first made their appearance on Ed Sullivan? And usually you'll see a crowd, you know, the audience, they'll sit there nice and sedately, and after the song is over, they'd applaud, and no problem. But the minute the Beatles hit the stage, there was nothing but screaming, right?
Right, sure.
There was nothing but screaming. They couldn't even hear the music. It had that effect. It had that effect. You remember how? Let me ask you something. How old are you?
I was born in '71, so I wasn't around for that. But you know, I've heard so many people talk about that, you know, that same experience. So, you know, I definitely can understand. Yeah, and I guess what my question is, and it may be a stupid question, but is kind of like, was there any ambivalence? Like, were you just like kind of like, if you wanted to be a songwriter, you wanted to develop your own thing, when the Zappa thing came along, was there any ambivalence like, well, if I join this, I'm kind of going to be part of someone else's things. I mean, part of a huge thing. Was there a hair of ambivalence, or was it like, hell no, this is exactly where I want to be? That's kind of what I was trying to get at.
Well, when I first heard Frank's first album, I didn't know what to make of it. It's like the first time I heard Hendrix. I didn't know what to make of that, you know. But the thing was, it had an effect. I mean, I grew up on classical music, and like I said, my mom was a jazz singer, and then there's I was, you know, I was in the church choir and all that other stuff, and that was considered, you know, music, real music, and this stuff, the Beatles, the Stones, Hendrix, you know, Frank, suddenly the definition of music totally changed, and it had to be redefined, and I wasn't, like I said, I never planned to do this or anything like that. All I knew was that I wanted to try to create sounds like I was hearing. You know what I mean? Because these are sounds, I mean, guitars didn't, until Hendrix and Frank, guitars didn't sound like that. You know, guitars did not sound like that. The guitars, they weren't a front instrument. The guitar player sat back in the back and then went kind of chink, 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 chink. You know, it wasn't the lead instrument. It was never in the forefront. And to have two electric guitars and the bass and drums, you know, I said, wait a second, what is going on? You know, but it broke all the rules, but it sounded great. You know, it was creative, it was all that stuff, and it sounded fantastic. You know, I mean, and when I heard Frank's music, it just totally made sense. You know what I'm saying? You had to think about it for a second. You know, you actually had to bear down and really listen. It wasn't just a little pop tune, and it wasn't a little I love you and you love me. None of that. You know, none of that crap. This was like serious music. You know, obviously this guy took his time, and he really took his time to create this stuff. So, you know, I think you better listen to it, because, you know, if I found that if I didn't really pay attention and listen, I was afraid of missing something.
Got it. So I want to be respectful of your time, because I know you got to run. So I want to move through, because in other interviews, I know you talk about how you connected with Frank Zappa. It was at you met him at a show, and then he invited you to audition. But maybe, do you think that we should jump to perhaps, like, I was kind of curious about, like, what it was like when you first joined. Like was it a smooth transition, or did it require a lot of work to get familiar with the tunes, connect with I mean, was your head just spinning when you got there, or did you feel like, you know?
Well, the answer is all of the above, because the transition, the way I met Frank, I was in college. My girlfriend at the time, who became my wife, she was studying for midterm exams, and I got myself on the local crew because one of my classmates was the head of the concert committee. So I convinced him to get me on the local crew so I could schlep equipment and take notes, essentially. Right? I just wanted to take notes and learn as much as I could from this guy, you know, to figure out how he did this. Now, by this time, this was 1977, and by the time you know, I could go to a Frank Zappa concert and actually pay attention. You know, I'd already been playing and gigging for 12 years. You know, I've been performing for 12 years. So, you know, there I go. So I'm there to take notes, and all I'm doing is just a local humper. You know, I'm just schlepping equipment. And man, it was very, very weird. By the time sound check came around, and we finished setting up for sound check, and the band came in, somehow, Frank made some eye contact, and he nodded his head and said hi, and all that stuff, and which was kind of strange to me, okay, because as far as I knew, well, this is the famous Frank Zappa, and he's a busy guy, and he's a legend, and all that stuff. But after sound check, we go backstage to the hospitality room, to eat dinner, the crew and the band, to eat dinner. And he had just happened to come in the hospitality room to eat. And he sat in a corner by himself. You remember those old Maytag commercials, The Loneliest Guy in Town?
I think so. I don't. I'm not. It's rings a bell.
Commercials. He was the loneliest guy in town because they never broke down and stuff like that. And everybody was afraid of him. Nobody talked to him and stuff like that. Well, that was my nickname for Frank, the Maytag repairman, because I was watching my classmates sitting at their table over in a corner, sitting in a corner and whispering among themselves about, oh, I heard this about Zappa, and I heard he used to stomp baby guts on stage. I heard he used to shit on stage. All this stuff, he's the devil, and all that other stuff, and all the rumors, all the legends you've ever heard about Frank Zappa, right? And Frank is sitting over in a corner, all by himself, eating alone. Everybody's afraid to talk to him, and all this other stuff. And he looks up after about 15 minutes. He looks up at me, because I was over on the other side. I was over on the other side of the room. In a corner, because I was the weird guy. I was the weird guy that stuck out like a sore thumb, and I had bands and stuff on campus, but it wasn't a popular band. It wasn't anything like that. It was kind of weird, and so I wasn't in with the in crowd. You know what I mean? And Frank looks up at me after about 15 minutes, and he says, "Hey, come here." And I looked around because surely he couldn't be talking to me, right? And he invited me over to his table and said, "Here, have a seat." Because I used to wear this floppy knit hat when I was in college. And the first thing he says to me, he says, "You know what, man? You got to be a musician because you stick out like a fucking sore thumb. You have got to be a musician. I'm sure you some instrument." And I went, "Well, yeah. I play a little guitar and I sing a little bit, and I've had bands and stuff. But dude, you're eating your dinner. I don't want to bother you. I don't want to disturb you, right?" And that's how our conversation started. And he goes, "No, you're not bothering me at all. Come on, have a seat." It's like everybody's afraid to talk to me. So, have a seat. You go to school here? I said, "Yeah, I go to school here." And we just started talking about music and all that stuff. He's asking me, well, what instrument I played, what kind of music I liked, and all that. And I let it slip out about halfway through the conversation that I told him the same influences that I told you, and I told him, yeah, I even know a couple of your songs, because I've got a band and blah blah blah. And he goes, "Really? That must. I guess you're not really too popular around here." I said, "That is exactly right. I am not one of the popular guys, and my bands are not the favorite bands, and all that stuff." So and so the conversation just continued on, and after a while, his manager comes in to tell him that they had his dressing room ready, and it was time for him to go in and warm up and tune up his guitar and get ready for the show because they were running out of time. So he shakes my hand and starts heading for his dressing room. And then as he got to the door, about to go through the door, he turns around and waves his hand and says, "Come on, follow me." And he ended up inviting me into his dressing room. And so I followed him and went and followed him. He said, I wasn't finished talking. We're having a good conversation and stuff like that, and that's rare. So, you know, we can keep on talking, you know, while I warm up. I couldn't believe it. You know, needless to say, I didn't think this was really happening, and all my classmates were like, had their hands covering their mouths going, what's going on? I don't believe it. Frank Zappa's talking to Ike Willis, the weirdest guy on campus. You know, that was me. That was me. And so, long story short, you know, he takes me to his dressing room, you know, tells me to have a seat, get comfortable. He tunes up his guitars, you know, getting ready for the show. And after a couple of minutes, he looks up and goes, you play guitar? Okay, here. Want to play this thing? And he hands me his guitar and tells me to play something. He said, you know some of my stuff, huh? Play one of my tunes. And I did. Are you familiar with a song called Carolina Hardcore Ecstasy?
I'm not, actually.
Okay, that song is from 1975. On God, I can't even remember the tour. I mean, but anyway, it was so funny. I start playing one of his songs and start singing. Then he joins in and starts singing along. He starts singing along, and then the rest of the band comes in. They start singing along. It was like a hootenanny, you know. It was, needless to say, since I couldn't believe any of this was happening, I kind of just, you know, just played it by ear and just played it cool and did what the man told me to do, which turns out to be essentially my relationship with Frank. You know, once I joined the band, that's basically all I did. I did what he told me to do. You know, I think that's pretty much it. And he liked what he heard, and he, oh man, you got a pretty good ear, and you got a pretty good voice. And then he starts telling me about by this time, this was 1977, and he says, you know, these tours have been kind of weird because I still haven't been satisfied with my lead vocalist. You know, I've been looking for a front man for years, and it just hasn't happened since Flo and Eddie and all those other guys. And he goes, you know, I tell you what, you know, every year after every tour, you know, I always hold auditions. You know, I always hold auditions to prepare for the next tour. And you know, I don't know why, but you know, hey, what do you think about me flying you out to L.A. to audition for the band? I went, well, me? You sure? And he says, yeah, man. I mean, you know, because he was just telling me to play this song, this chord, that chord, and you know, I'm a self-taught guitarist, so you know, I don't read music, and I never went to music school. I just you know, taught myself. So, you know, all I was doing was following directions. You know, he was telling me what to do, pretty simple instructions, and so I was just following instructions. And he was pretty pleased with it, and he introduced me to the band at that time, Adrian Ballou, Tommy Mars, Ed Mann, and I was just, you know, I was having a great time, and of course, I was convinced I was dreaming. You know what I mean? This isn't really happening, but you know, I'll enjoy it. I'll enjoy it while you know, while it's going on. You know, because I couldn't tell any of my friends. My best friend, who played sax in my on campus band, he's the one that taught me all about Zappa, brought me up to speed on the history, the bands, the personnel, and all that stuff. And I could especially tell him because I knew he just wouldn't believe me. And so after all this stuff, long story short, Frank says, okay, well, it's time for the show, because everybody was out there yelling and screaming for Zappa to come out because the show was running late because he was backstage talking to me, and including my best friend and my roommates and all that stuff. So he says, well, don't go anywhere, you know, after the show's over, come on back and we can pick up the conversation where we left off, you know. And plus it says, and also don't forget to give me your address and your phone number and your vital statistics, so that you know, I can get in touch with you after the tour is over, and so I can fly you out there. And so that's what I did. And then the show was over, and then I go back to schlepping equipment, and you know, loading out. And Frank, you know, she came and shook my hand and told me how much he enjoyed talking with me and stuff like that, and you know, and he says, you know, don't forget, you know, I think you got a good shot at getting in the band, you know, because this is everybody is afraid of my music, but you don't seem to have a problem with it, you know, and you know, and I've been looking for a vocalist, and I've been looking for a frontman, and you know, I might as well try somebody new, because everybody else that I've tried hasn't worked. So we shook hands, and I gave him my information, and then went back to schlepping equipment. And then after the loadout, I went back to my dormitory room. Well, actually, my girlfriend's dormitory room. My girlfriend, who is now my wife of 37 years. And I told her what happened, and she's going, well, are you kidding me? I said, yeah, well, there you go. That's what happened. You know, unbelievable. She asked me, well, did you tell Jeff? Did you tell anybody? I said, crazy? No, that's the one thing I didn't do, is tell anybody, because I'd be the laughing stock of the whole school. Nobody would believe that. So fast forward 8 months later, while I was in summer school catching up on my credits and stuff, because I'm a political science law major. That was my major in college. I was getting ready to go to law school. And you know, my parents wanted me to go to law school. My big brother's an architect. And, you know, I got to get my degree and go out there in the real world and get a job and all that other stuff. And
so your mom, who was a jazz singer, wasn't pushing the music thing on you, right? Or she was a jazz singer in addition to doing other things, or
she did bunches of other stuff. She worked for various government agencies and stuff, and she invented a few programs and stuff like that. She was, you know, it just so happened that, you know, I'm the youngest of 6 kids, so you know, basically, you know, her and my dad, Big Ike, you know, they had to pay the bills, you know, and so besides, like I said, this is being a professional musician back in those days was not considered a real occupation, right?
Right, sure.
So, you know, basically, my big brother and I, we were the first ones in our family to college and all that other stuff, because you know, I was born in 1955, and that wasn't the thing that black people could do easily, right?
Right.
So, and you're expected, you know, when you're growing up, medium middle class, you know, and you get to go to college and all that stuff, especially after the civil rights movement and all that other stuff. You know, you go to college, make your parents proud, get your degree, go out there and get that real job, you know, and become a good consumer like everybody else. But my mom and dad, they knew that, you know, they were right there with me and encouraging me all these years since I was a kid, and they'd seen all my bands. I used to play festivals and love-ins and stuff like that, you know, and they were very, and they provided encouragement. But the thing is, you know, nobody was ever really thinking that it was going to turn into something, especially being a rock and roll musician, and especially being a black rock and roll musician, guitar player, you know, and the, you know the setup, you know, everybody's pigeonholed into categories and definitions, et cetera. So nobody would expect me to actually be able to make a living as a professional rock and roll black rock and guitar player. So, it basically what I do is it's always been looked upon as a hobby. You know what I mean? But nothing to get serious about it, and it's definitely not a real occupation. But when I told my parents, fast forward again, I'm in summer school catching up on my credits so that I could graduate. I missed a half a semester putting my musical career together. And I'm in my dorm room and the phone rings, and it's Frank, who just got back from Europe on the Shake Your Booty tour. And, I was taking a nap. He wakes me up and says, okay, can I speak to Ike? I said, well, this is Ike. Hey, Ike, this is Frank. And I'm saying, well, Frank who? Because 6 months later, and I was not entertaining any notions about him calling me back. But he actually did. And he said, no, I'm a man of my word. I promised you that I was going to call you back and fly and arrange it to fly you out to audition for the band. I was serious. So I just got back from tour, and just give me I just need a week to rent a rehearsal sound stage, and then this was like a Tuesday, and he says, so I'll call you back at the end of the week with your ticket information and stuff, and man, this is going to be great. I got a good feeling about you. I can't wait to talk to you again. And that was that. The following Tuesday, I left school. I had to talk to my senior advisor, and ask for a leave of absence so that I could go out to L.A. and audition for Frank. Went home, told my parents, and both my mom and dad were like, they were stupefied. But they were proud of me, they're very, very proud of me, very encouraging. And they said, the first thing they said was, yeah, doesn't surprise me, you'll probably do good, you'll do well. Go out there and kick ass, and make us proud, son. That's basically how it happened. I flew to LA and I stayed. I flew to LA and I passed the audition and I stayed. And the rest, as they say, is history.
It's really an incredible story. I mean, it's a lot like a dream. I mean, how many times do people have these chance meetings, and do the chance meetings ever lead to anything? But it kind of hints at this maybe depth of intuition that this guy was tuned to. I don't know if you think on those terms, but it sort of seems highly intuitive, to kind of, and just that he followed through and that the whole thing happened. Anyways, it's an incredible story.
He was intuitive. Frank is I still consider him the most intelligent human being I've ever met. He was very intuitive. He could read a person or a situation in 2 seconds flat. And he had confidence in me. He had faith in me. And basically all I did, he finally told me one day when we were recording Joe's Garage, he says, and he told me, the main thing he liked about me was the fact that I did the one thing that no other band member was able to do, which is essentially follow directions. When Frank says, okay, I want you to do this and do this and do this like that until I say stop, that's all I want. And, well, that's simple enough, how hard could it be? And I had the easiest job on earth. All I had to do was do what the boss said. And that's it. And so he says, yeah, you're ever met that was able to do exactly what I tell him to do without ad-libbing and without adding anything else, without showing off, without trying to impress him or anything like that. I never had a problem with that because it made sense. I mean, like I said, the first time I heard Freak Out, it made sense. And everything, Frank's music made sense to me. His approach made sense. It was very logical, very intuitive, very creative. And funny as hell. And that's another thing. What a sense of humor. And so I was having a ball. I had, like I said, I had the easiest job on the planet.
That's amazing. And I've struck, like I said to you earlier before our conversation, I come to Zappa late in the game. I really started to get into it a bit for this interview, but my influences started with guys like Hendrix and blues rockers and the British guys back into early blues and jazz and American music. But
right.
I missed the whole thing. But as I started to listen to the albums you were on and all this stuff, it's like a sensory not overload, because I don't want to make it sound negative. It was just the amount of different creative strains that were going into it, from thematic elements to like different musical styles colliding and all this stuff. It was just like, wow, it's really, like you said earlier in the conversation, it takes a deep listen. You can't just put it on and really appreciate it. It's almost like classical music in that sense.
I considered it. My description of Frank's music, I always considered it. I described it as live cartoons. It's like live cartoons. I mean, because we were doing cartoons, and we're doing Broadway musicals, we're doing jazz, we're doing classical, but it all made sense because Frank was the guy who put it all in context. You know what I mean?
It's such an interesting fusion as a person of really businessy and structured, and then incredibly creative. Like a lot of times you don't see those things fused in a human being. They're kind of
no. Frank was. I mean, you magic word, structure. Everything Frank created, and his instructions and everything like that, it was incredible. Rehearsals and all that and arrangements were incredibly structured. They were incredibly structured. They were amazing. But still there was enough looseness. There was a looseness there and a relaxation and that kind of attitude. Like I said, well, it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? It's like I didn't waste. A lot of the other band members over the years would spend too much time overthinking it. They were just going, what is he doing? You're not supposed to do it like that. That's not how they taught us at the seminary and blah, blah, blah. And luckily for me, since I never went to the seminary, I didn't worry about it,
No, I was going to say, so, like, you were very much there as a student and as a faithful, musician, in a sense, to just, you were an open vessel to just sort of let him create through you.
Sure.
But I'm curious, like, if you could sum up in terms of maybe some principles or values or, something about both maybe the studio experience or what you learned, right, in a simple sense. Like, what did you really take away from that experience? And I'm consolidating some questions down here because I know you have to roll soon, but I just wanted to, get at, like, if you
What I learned was patience and concentration and things like that, and just using your head, just using your head. That's basically, and also having approaching the music and approaching whatever the project was with it's like Frank's thing. Like I said, he was a weirdo too. He basically used to sit back and tell me stories about how he grew up. He was the oddball. And he got laughed at and kicked out of school by the teachers, and he wasn't one of the beautiful people either. And so the thing was, he says, well, look, when you do this kind of music and when you do this stuff and you write your own stuff, you've got to have confidence in your creation enough so that if you're spending the time creating it and all that, don't be afraid of it. Get out there and make it yours. Make it proud. It's your baby, so get out there and do it. And that's like, well, that yet again, it made sense. Yet again, it made sense. And Frank always made sense. It's logical. I couldn't see any flaws in the logic, right? I couldn't see any flaws in his philosophy or his approach. And the whole time that people would complain and bitch and moan about, well, that's not the right way to do things, and that's not the way they teach it, and all that other stuff. But guess what? The bottom line is, the punchline is, it always worked. It worked. And how can you bitch at a guy and complain about what he's doing when the results are so magnificent? Does that make sense?
The results were magnificent. I'm curious your take on what that sauce was. Was it just the commitment, the focus, and then this, like, the creative element is kind of like, you can't bottle it, you can't emulate, you can't, like, you could, so that's kind of an X factor. But, like, I guess, I was just wondering, like, how did it, like, even in your own, as a songwriter and musician, like, how do you approach things now based on what you've learned, like, in terms of your own songwriting or
same way? It's like, you if you're writing your own stuff, and got to have enough confidence in it. You got to have enough confidence in it to go for it whole hog, and be proud of it, and don't be afraid of it, and et cetera, et cetera. It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool.
You're saying confidence was a really big part of this, like having the confidence to put something out there, and just let it be out there as you put it out there, regardless of what the fuck anyone thinks. Just put it out there, and because you're gonna have to, sooner or later, you have to get out there and bare ass naked. Okay. Exactly. Bare ass naked. And that's how it works. And who cares if it isn't the way that they do it in the class books and all that stuff. Who cares? As long as it works, as long as it works, isn't that what you're really looking for? You get the results, right? Who cares? Who cares what the process was, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's what makes sense. That's what seems okay to me, and it made sense. It just totally made sense. And so I'm going like, well, okay, it works, and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to do your thing, and be proud of it no matter what, because that's how you get to be a songwriter. That's how you get to be a professional. Yeah. That's a very important message, and like what a vessel he was for that message, because he kind of embodied that, epitomized that in a lot of ways. It
was amazing. He did his thing because he'd been laughed at and bullied and made fun of, and he didn't care. Since he's paying for it, since he's financing it and all that other stuff, what do they care how he's creating his art? What does anybody care? What business is it of theirs? And then don't come running around. Don't come running back when I'm up there on stage. And performing it, which is something that most people are afraid to do.
Yeah, I think it's a great lesson for new artists and musicians who are coming up, because often they're just looking at the final product of years of this kind of soul searching and artistic honesty and all that stuff.
Exactly.
But it's a very powerful. I'm glad we touched on that for sure.
It is very powerful. It's amazing stuff. And Frank taught me a really a really pretty cool lesson once too. He said, "Look, what it takes a lot to do what we do. You know, go on the road, tour, live with a band full of other people, and then go out on stage every night and perform. You know, and people make people yell and buy your records and all that stuff. It takes a lot. It takes a lot, and it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of patience, and it takes all of that stuff. And he says, consider yourself lucky. You know, you're luckier than most. And people who become managers, roadies, agents, stuff like that, those are the people who couldn't make it in the music business. Those are the ones that were too afraid to do it or whatever. And he was absolutely right. So I didn't care. I stopped worrying about it because I used to remember what I mentioned about being the oddball and being a there's no such thing as a black rock and roll guitar player with a real rock band, with a real live rock band, with a legend, playing with a legend, right?
Right.
And back in 1978, when I was 20 years old and I joined the band, in Europe, no problem. I mean, we're God in Europe, but I would get asked questions in my own country, by white kids and stuff, the fans and whatnot. They'd see me walking backstage with my backstage pass on, and they would ask either, "Oh, you work for Zappa? What are you part of the crew?" And then I tell them, "Well, no, I'm in the band." "No, you're in the band? Oh, you must be the bass player or the drummer." You see, because this is America, right? You must be you must play bass or drums, because the black guys do the rhythm, right, or play bass. And I would tell them that I was no, I'm the guitar player. "No, man, Frank doesn't have a black guitar player." No, that kind of shit. And I used to get pissed off about it and stuff. And that's when Frank told me that story that I just told you. That's when he told me that story that I just told you. So it's like, because he goes, don't let it bother you. Don't let it bother you. When Frank he said, when I was in sixth grade, he says, let me tell you a little story. When I was in sixth grade, I'm an Italian, and Frank was born in 1947, and that was back when Italians were wops, dagos, et cetera, right?
Right.
And Frank said, by the time I was in sixth grade, I was 6 feet tall. I was 6 feet tall. Had size 13 feet. A long nose, and I was a nigger then. And I went, you make a good point. You're absolutely correct. So he goes, look, don't worry about anything. I hired you, and I can fire you. And none of those people, of those assholes, don't know what the hell they're talking about. Okay, so relax. Your job's not in jeopardy. You're doing a great job, and until you hear otherwise, that's it. How about that?
Awesome. That's awesome. I mean, that's powerful knowledge coming from someone who walked it and lived it, and it doesn't get better than that.
Correct. And from that point, I didn't worry about anything, my job or anything like that. I didn't worry about anything that I had to do, because as long as Frank liked it, I'm good.
What an amazing thing to have a mentor. Like not only your idol, like music idol, but a mentor like that. Like it's just amazing. Great.
Exactly. And the thing was, he said, like I said, until I tell you otherwise, you got a job. I'm perfectly satisfied with what you're doing. And I ended up being with him. I ended up being with him longer than any member of his band ever. And
from simple principles of just not overthinking it, not bringing too much of your own stuff to the table, just executing what the man's vision was, which is what you were there to do, which is, another really important lesson, particularly in doing sessions or any kind of side band work,
Thing that there and do your job. This is what the guy is paying you for. He's paying you a salary. So that's all you got to do is do what he says do, and that's how you earn your paycheck every week.
So, sorry, I just had a question on this level. Like, while this was brewing for you, were you kind of like had your own aspirations as well in terms of like, were you looking past the Zappa thing, or were you just perfectly where you wanted to be and not looking forward? Like just in where you were, or were you like, was this in service of you were accumulating knowledge, does that make sense? Like, did you want to launch a project that you were thinking on, or songwriting or anything like that, or were you settled where you were and this was as good as it gets, in a sense?
Once again, your questions are spot on, because of course I had aspirations. Like I said, I've been playing professionally for 12 years before I met Frank, and now I was in his band as a sideman. But people like Steve Vai and Terry Bozzio and all these other guys, the first thing they wanted to do, using Frank as a resume, they wanted to go out and be rock stars. They'd go out and be rock stars and be famous. And basically they were just using Frank as a reference, as a resume. And I was like, I never treated him like that. I was there. I was there to learn as much as I could, and to say, as long as he wanted me. And I told him, dude, you're gonna have to physically throw me out when you're done with me, And then he really liked that, because that's when I found out what I just told you. They were just using him as a resume so they could be rock stars,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like the student studying with the master. Like you leave when it's like you said, when he's ready to throw you out.
I mean, if it got to the point where he wasn't satisfied or pleased with his work, then I deserve to be kicked out.
Right. That speaks to a real depth with you in terms of your own seriousness. Like it wasn't a resume hopping or a job hopping thing. It was a commitment to the music wherever that led, which I think is super cool.
The thing is, I'm here to. I want to learn as much as I can for as long as I can. I mean, come on. You can't. Basically, you shouldn't get. No, I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to work with this guy. I mean, he was a freaking legend. So I mean, I didn't want to waste that, right? I didn't want to waste that, and so I want to learn as much as I can about the music business and about engineering and recording, performing and composing and all that other stuff, and touring, and as long as that lasts, I'm gonna take advantage of it, for as long as I can. And Frank really appreciated that, from me, because he says one day when we were recording Thingfish, he says, "Come on, Ike, aren't you tired of hanging around me and stuff like that? Why don't you do what the other guys do? You're ready to go out and be a rock star, Just let me know, and I'll let you go. I'll set you free." I went, "Man, are you crazy? Are you crazy? I'm not going anywhere, until you're ready to kick me out. I'm not going anywhere." And he goes, "Are you serious?" I said, "Dude, you have got to be kidding me. Why should I leave? You need me, and you are satisfied with my work, and besides, I'm enjoying myself. I'm digging it. I'm loving it. And as long as you're happy with it, as long as you're still satisfied with it, I'll stay as long as you need me, and that's how it is. And so that was, that was one of our deep conversations, and that's, yeah. I mean, does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And as far as the life of it, was it a rigorous kind of thing, or you were saying you were loving it, but I'm sure it was quite a bit of work as well, too, right? I mean, it was, how structured was that end of it, like the work part?
Very structured, very hard work, and all that stuff. And like I said, all of the above. All of the above. I was considered teacher's pet, but he worked my ass off. Okay? He worked my ass off. In fact, actually, he worked me harder. He worked me harder than everybody else. They were calling the professional members of the band, the sight readers, and the ones that went to music school and all that stuff. That was the running joke. I was teacher's pet. But Frank rode me. He rode me harder than anybody else, and so I took advantage of it. I was gonna make it pay off and learn as much as I could.
In terms of preserving the spirit of his music, what role do you see yourself as sort of playing into that, post Zappa period?
The week before he died, he asked me. He told me that these are your final instructions. I want you to do your best in whatever way you can to try to keep my music alive. And that's however you can do it, however it's done, whatever way that you can figure out to do it. I want you to help keep my music alive, because you know more songs than everybody. You've been with me longer than anybody, and you can do it. I trust you, and I have faith in you. This was a week before he died. So, dude, that's a big job. That's a big job, and and I appreciated Frank and respected him so much that my answer was, of course I will. Whatever you want me to do, I'm on it. I'll do the best I can.
And right now, you're playing in a number of tribute bands for Zappa tribute bands?
I have 12 Zappa tribute bands all over the world.
And you're off shortly to play with one? Is that the Project Object, or?
In New Jersey. My New Jersey Zappa band is called We Used to Cut the Grass.
Cool. I have a friend there, actually. I talked to a good friend of mine, Tommy Stereo, is a big fan of yours and Frank's, and he kind of tutored me on this interview and told me all about meeting you. I think he had a picture with you or something. And anyway, he lives in Jersey out that way, so I'm sure he'll be coming to see you on the Jersey tour. Anyway, man, thank you so much for taking your time. Obviously, the purpose of this interview is to let people who are tuned into Air Gigs know what an amazing opportunity that you're offering here to doing remote sessions now, and Ike's doing them in conjunction with Evan, another Air Gigs member who's got the studio. So, he's pretty much, open to doing these remote sessions. I was just curious, do you have any thoughts on projects you might like to work on, or what would be kind of up your alley, or anything fair game?
Anything's fair game. I mean, come on, after working for almost 17 years for Frank, most
That's true. Sorry, I'm laughing because, I'm sure there's nothing anyone could really throw at you that would be, out of left field.
Basically what I'm working on now is my next album, And so once I get into my wife and I are out house hunting and stuff, and we're looking for a place so that we can have, headquarters and studio and et cetera. So I can write. So that's the thing. But other than that, I like working with new artists.
Sorry, you cut out there. Sorry. Say that again. You like working with new artists?
Challenge. You know what I mean? I like a challenge.
And stylistically, it doesn't matter from do you prefer to focus on certain styles of music, or?
I don't have a preference. Music, okay. If I like it, If I like it, I'll say so.
Very cool, very cool. And so you're working on, and just, you know, you're working on an album of your own now. You're completing an album of original music.
Yeah, I'm actually way behind. I mean, I released my first 2 albums 20 years ago. I'm way behind, man. I'm way behind because I've been busy touring and raising kids and all that other stuff. And it's time, you know, it's time for me, for the old man. It's time for me to get my stuff in here before I get too old.
Absolutely. Well, you've been probably a lot of ideas percolating there for quite some time and ready to burst, you know, if not already. You know, are the songs all written, or are you in the process of putting them together now? So cool.
I'm always writing. You know, I'm always writing, and I'm always have ideas and for compositions and stuff like that. You know, I've always written songs since I was a kid. So I mean, that's just a part of the process.
Awesome. Well, we ran way over the 20-30 minutes that we talked about, so I want to thank you for your, you know, generosity of your time and all that stuff. And is there anything else you'd like to add? Maybe, you know, any advice to young artists, or just any last points, anything we didn't cover?
Well, for young artists should be in this business. I think young artists should be in this business because they love to do it, and they couldn't live. They wouldn't be able to live without it. Not to have great hair, not to score chicks. You know what I mean? The reason they should do it is because they love it. And if those aren't the reasons, then they're in the wrong business, and they should get out because they're ruining it for everybody else.